Well, a recent report from the UN shows that foreign direct investment flows to South Africa dropped by 43.6% year on year to $107 billion in the first 6 months of 2012, reflecting sluggish domestic economic growth. Now, joining me to a look at the impact that tax policies have on FDI here in South Africa, Kyle Mandy, Head of National Tax Technical at PwC. Kyle, thank you very much for joining us. So do tax policies directly impact FDI flows?
To a limited extent only. We always talk about tax being the tail rather than the business dog. So tax is always going to be a factor, but it's not the overriding factor. It sits quite well down on the list.
So when we see that 43% drop-off, over 43% drop-off, would you relate that to what's taking place in the economy and concerns around the outlook for growth?
I think that's certainly one of the factors. There are a number of factors that come into it. Obviously, it's looking at the policies that government is implementing, whether that be the nationalisation debate or the question of whether or not the necessary infrastructure is going to be in place. Those are all much bigger issues that need to be considered as well.
Yeah, and then of course, government at the same time has got all these plans in place to help stimulate growth, and they're providing tax incentives for companies, especially in the manufacturing base, create this amount of jobs, build that factory here, help reindustrialize South Africa, and we'll give you a tax incentive there. Are those working? Tell us about some of those.
That do work to a limited extent. As I say, the major consideration is going to be other factors, but the tax implications of it might be the ultimate factor that leads to the investment being made or not made. It ultimately boils down to whether the returns on that investment are going to be viable or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so tax can make those returns viable, but it's not the ultimate factor.
And of course, you have to take rising electricity costs, labour uncertainty into account. Let's talk about other incentives here in South Africa. The headquarter company regime, perhaps it should be called the holding company regime, as it's called in Mauritius, for example. Does that work? Is it working?
Again, it's working to a limited extent, but ultimately the objective of that incentive is not to attract direct foreign investment into South Africa per se, but it's to make South Africa more attractive as a holding company regime for investments flowing through South Africa.
And that, of course, would relate to, kind of positioning South Africa as the gateway into Africa.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. So what benefits are there for companies who are wanting to set up a base somewhere in Africa? Why should they come to South Africa because of that?
Well, the benefits essentially is that South Africa won't then look to tax income that is flowing through South Africa as a mere conduit. So you end up with relief, for example, from the South African controlled foreign company legislation won't come into play for those companies. There's relief for withholding taxes in terms of amounts that are flowing through South Africa, and various other little bits and pieces of relief. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, it's just meant to give effect to South Africa not adding to the tax costs as opposed to real tax relief, if you like.